Welcome to another edition of the Taking Down Trump podcast. I'm Tristan Snell. We're going to be doing a bigger discussion on why JD Vance might be the end of the American Republic as we know it, in addition to being weird. But first, as always, let's talk about some of the craziest news from law and politics in the past week. The biggest story this week, Tim Walz is going to be the Democratic VP candidate. Kamala Harris making that announcement yesterday in a big rally in Philadelphia, Walz appearing as the Veep nominee for the first time. And the Republicans didn't exactly take it so well. They don't really know what to do with Tim Walz. He's a hunter. He's a football coach, high school teacher. They're having a hard time painting him as some sort of crazy coastal liberal, which is what they love to paint anybody on the Democratic side as. The one thing that they tried to throw at him is that as Minnesota governor, he signed a bill into law making tampons and maxi pads available to girls in public school. And this was somehow used against him, calling him Tampon Tim. That's the best that the Republican Party under Donald Trump could come up with. But let's just take that. I'm fine with fighting on that turf. If they want to fight on that turf about girls and their menstrual cycles and the government, let's go ahead and fight on that turf, shall we? Because Donald Trump's Project 2025 would create a federal national database of every pregnancy. And then according with that, it would have to include menstrual cycles for millions of American women and girls. Every single pregnancy in America would get logged and kept nationally in a federal database. That is what they are proposing. That is what they are planning. You can go look it up. We're going to be talking about it in one of the upcoming Decoding 2025 episodes about this topic. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about exactly who is somehow protecting the girls of America here. Because it sure as hell ain't the Republicans. They want to track and surveil them. And Tim Walz just wanted to make sure that if something happened while they were at school, that they had the equipment that they needed. That's just being nice and courteous, whereas the Republican approach is creepy and, yes, weird and Orwellian and dystopian and unconstitutional and all of those things. But let's just, we're going to talk about that a lot more when we get to that topic in Decoding 2025. Meanwhile, as for Donald Trump, he is not exactly taking all of this very well. He went on Truth Social yesterday and actually seemed to hope that somehow there'd be some crack in the universe and Joe Biden would come back and become the nominee again. This is what he said out loud on his Truth Social yesterday. And it just shows exactly how lost they are and how they really, really don't know what to do with themselves and how desperate Donald Trump is going to become personally. A number of people have pointed this out, but I think it bears emphasis. Donald Trump is going to get sentenced on September 18th in the New York criminal case, and I think he's probably going to be getting a prison sentence. Then he's now suddenly on track to lose the election in November. So let's just carry this forward. We've suddenly, I think we all had a collective moment of feeling very pessimistic about a lot of these prosecutions, but they're not dead. They're just on appeal or dormant or in some sort of delayed process, okay? It's not like the plane's never going to take off. You just have a 2-hour delay, so to speak, except in the context of litigation that might mean a year or 18 months. Seems like forever. But I'm here to tell you that that actually is sadly kind of normal, especially when Donald Trump is the defendant. In the Trump University case, we had to stomach an 18-month delay to deal with an issue on appeal that we ultimately won, and we ultimately prevailed in that matter. So let's just be really real about what's going to happen here. In 2025, probably, the DC January 6th case is going to go to trial, and I think Donald Trump is going to get convicted by a jury in that matter. And yes, the Atlanta case is probably going to go to trial sometime in 2025. And even the Florida case might see a trial in 2025 we're going to have to go through an appellate process there in the 11th Circuit, just like there's an appellate process in Georgia that's going to have to happen regarding the whole Fani Willis thing. And we're going to see a whole lot of procedure and probably appeal regarding this whole immunity thing in the DC January 6th case. We're going to talk about all of those coming up more soon. But suffice it to say for now, if Donald Trump doesn't win this election, his legal troubles don't suddenly somehow evaporate. He didn't get rid of them. He just delayed them. He kicked the can down the road into 2025. It turns out that maybe the real project 2025 here is going to be finishing off the prosecutions of Donald J. Trump. And in the meantime, already potentially facing a prison sentence in the case that has gone to trial. So watch for Donald Trump to get even more desperate as we get closer and closer to the election and polls don't go his way. Because if he really sees this, and I do think he sees it, this is not just about him not getting back into power. This is about him going to prison. He is increasingly getting cornered. The walls are slowly, imperceptibly maybe to us, but he knows it. He feels it. The walls are closing in on him. And the more that happens, the more desperate he's going to get. And we're going to have to be ready for that. He is going to lash out more and more. Hopefully that'll backfire. Hopefully that's going to turn off a lot of folks in the middle that are going to be horrified by some of the things he's going to say and do, even if they're not already. And speaking more Project 2025, some good news this week. The director of Project 2025 has resigned, seemingly a forced resignation. Interestingly, in a case of the lady doth protest too much, Donald Trump's campaign then issued a statement saying that this is what happens when you try to claim that you have a connection to us that you don't have. And it's like, nobody would have then been talking about your connection to Project 2025 had you not issued that press release. All you did was just reinforce the notion to everybody. It's sort of a Streisand effect. All you did was just reinforce the notion that, yes, Project 2025 is Donald Trump's Project 2025. It was written by most of the secretaries and undersecretaries, deputy secretaries, assistant secretaries of his cabinet. In some cases, the actual secretary wrote the piece. In the case of Ben Carson, writing the section on HUD. In other places, it was the deputy secretary. In the case of Commandant Ken Cuccinelli, writing the section on the Department of Homeland Security. But it was all of his people, his senior staffers, his political appointees. They're the ones who actually wrote the damn thing. And he was at a dinner for the Heritage Foundation, which published it, thanking them for doing all of this work regarding the details of their movement. And he wasn't talking about some other movement that he happened to like. No, he's talking about him and Trumpism and the Trump Republican, the MAGA project. That is what Project 2025 is obviously all about. It's about a second Trump term by the people that would be running it, all in consultation with Donald Trump and his inner circle. That is very obviously what it is. Let's be clear about what this resignation means. It doesn't really mean a whole lot substantively because Project 2025 has been drafted. The next step would be to implement it if Trump were to win. There's not really anything for them to do right now except try to run away from it and hide it and wish that they had never made it public, which is what they've been doing. What it shows for all of us is that we are, as the internet would say, over the target. Okay, when we are talking about Project 2025, we are winning. It is causing these MAGA folks to freak out. Donald Trump has been running away from it ever since. The entire Republican Party has been trying to. They're trying to claim they had nothing to do with it. Yeah, that's because they know they had a lot to do with it, and they know that it's really, really hurting them with voters. Okay, so keep talking about Project 2025. We're going to keep talking about it too. The more we talk about it, the more we're going to preserve democracy in America. Other items in the news. Josh Hawley made a fool of himself in Congress, except that that's not really news because he does it all the time. But let's just talk about an issue related to that I think bears some discussion, which is that Josh Hawley purports to be a senator from the great state of Missouri. He is up for re-election this year, and so this is even more germane. The kicker is that Josh Hawley doesn't live in Missouri. In fact, he hasn't lived in Missouri in an awfully long time. He lives in Virginia. Now, granted, a lot of members of Congress have some home in the DC area. Of course, they kind of need to, right? Because they're in DC all the time. But Josh Hawley doesn't have then some other home in Missouri that he goes back to. He doesn't have any other sort of like deep roots there, some sort of family home. No. The home that he lists for his voter registration is a lake house in the Ozarks owned by his sister. Okay, maybe he visits there sometimes, but there's no way that he can claim somehow that this is actually his real family residence. It's well known that Josh Hawley doesn't really spend much time in Missouri except to do constituent services things, to raise money, to talk to Republicans in Missouri, blah, blah, blah. He doesn't really live there. His family definitely doesn't live there. This is all a very, very well-known thing. And somehow this doesn't end up meriting a lot of reporting from the mainstream media. I think it's because they think it's baked in and just not news anymore. Like, people know about it, so they're not going to dwell on it. This is a mistake because we're all just sitting around allowing a violation of the Constitution to occur and nobody is doing anything about it. Okay, the Constitution requires that a senator reside in the state that he or she is representing. Okay, the fact that Josh Hawley doesn't live in Missouri is a problem. He is breaking the law. He's violating the Constitution, and he's not the only one. It's also a well-known open secret in Washington that Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville doesn't live in Alabama, and in fact never has lived in Alabama. He had an apartment that he kept there when he was coaching football there, but Tommy Tuberville lives in Florida, and he has always lived in Florida during any time period that anyone cared about who Tommy Tuberville is. And he still does today. So why are we letting these people violate the Constitution like this? Why aren't we doing anything about it? It's a question that we need to keep on asking about. It's something that we need to insist that the mainstream media start to cover. It's something that we need to actually turn into a political liability, because we shouldn't be having these people get away with living wherever they feel like. At the end of the day, it's effectively cosplaying some kind of, ruby red conservative. They don't actually want to live in the places that they represent. They want to live someplace else where they can go to Whole Foods and where their kids will be in a school district that their wives like. That's what they want, right? They don't want to actually live in these places. They just want to pretend to represent them. JD Vance is like this too, right? JD Vance doesn't actually represent the real interests of the people of Ohio. JD Vance represents a certain weird right-wing moneyed interest that we're going to talk about in a few more minutes. It's all a put on. It's a front. It's a disguise. It's cosplay. That's what they're doing here. So whenever you see any of these folks not live in the state that they're supposed to be representing or the district that they're supposed to be representing, that should set off alarm bells, because not only are we seeing a legal violation, but we're seeing somebody who is engaging in political malpractice. They don't actually give a crap about the people that they represent. They just see an opportunity, right? Somebody like Vance we don't know what views he holds because they've been all over the place. Like, he sold out every view that he used to espouse 8 years ago completely. All right. Because why? Because moneyed interests like Peter Thiel bankrolled him to get into politics. And so he just adopted whatever clothes they told him to put on. So now he's cosplaying a far hard ultra-right crazy conservative. We don't know what he is, but the cravenness and opportunism of these people, that's really the problem here, along with the constitutional violations. But we have to start paying attention to these things because they matter enormously. It is part of the grift and fraud and corruption that characterizes the MAGA movement. And on to a little bit more of that, let's talk about America PAC. This is a super PAC that supports Donald Trump. Elon Musk is supposedly now giving it a whole bunch of money. But it turns out that they've been doing something very interesting and very illegal and that it has now attracted the attention of prosecutors in Michigan, and it should be attracting the attention of a lot more prosecutors and lawyers going forward. Here's what America PAC is doing, okay? When people sign up for America PAC, it's purporting to march them through a collection of personal information to help you register to vote. But then depending on what state you live in, it might be doing something very different with that information. And in no circumstances does it appear to be doing anything necessarily to help that person to vote. In other words, it's collecting a bunch of personal information under false pretenses. If you put down that you live in California, it basically spits out a thank you page and then does nothing with your information. If you say that you live in a swing state, it then tries to collect a bunch of additional personal information from you, all the better to bombard you with solicitations for you to do X, Y, and Z. But it also does not appear to be doing anything to actually register anybody to vote. Again, mind you, let's be clear here. If anybody is purporting to say that they're going to help you register to vote, you need to Google whether or not that's actually true, right? If you're not going to your actual local election board, right, and you can find all of this out at vote.gov, it will actually help you. That is the federal government's website for helping you connect with the local authorities where you live so that you can register to vote or check your voter registration. If you think you're already registered, you might want to double check and make sure you know where your polling place is. You can apply to vote by mail or vote absentee, whatever it is that's applicable in your state and applicable to your situation. But you need to be doing that from an official website. There are some bona fide nonprofits that are doing that work fairly and openly and transparently and correctly. Vote.org is one of them. TurboVote is another. There are others that we'll probably explore as we get closer to the election. But what America PAC is doing is saying, hey, we're going to help you register to vote, and then using it as a way to collect information about some people and not collect information about other people. And it doesn't look like that there's any effort whatsoever to actually do anything that will help somebody register to vote. Now, here's the thing about that. When the mainstream media is reported on this with the fact that then Michigan state prosecutors are looking into this, a number of people opined that they're not really sure exactly what law in Michigan would be violated by this activity. But I have an answer to that. It's because we're looking in the wrong place. We're looking at people are thinking about election law. No. There's a more basic answer to this question. It's fraud. That's what it is. It's fraud. It's a deceptive business practice. A PAC is a company, and they have to abide by laws that exist in all 50 states and on the federal level that forbid deceptive business practices, that forbid consumer fraud. That is what America PAC appears to be violating when they're doing things like this. This could lead to maybe not criminal liability, but certainly civil liability. It certainly does merit investigation and potentially government enforcement action by local and state authorities, possibly by the federal government, but I doubt that they'll go there. But we should be seeing that. And could it actually lead to private cases by people who feel that they were effectively misled and tricked into providing their personal information under false pretenses? They were told that they were going to be helped to register to vote, and that didn't happen. Instead, it was just a way to hoover up their personal information. We should really not be surprised by this, but I'm going to be very disappointed if we don't see some significant legal action to do something about it. Michigan is on the right path, and I really hope that other people will be too. We simply cannot tolerate or just let stand this kind of gross fraud and corruption and grifting, again, anywhere near our political and electoral systems. You can't be running around telling people that you're going to help them to register to vote and then doing something else with that information. You're lying to them. It is a misrepresentation. It is fraud, and that is not legal. So we should be doing something about that. Those are just some of the major stories that I've been covering. As always, follow me on Twitter and subscribe to my Substack for the latest. Coming up next, we'll do a deeper dive on JD Vance. For a bigger discussion this week, let's talk more about JD Vance. But first, this comes with a warning. JD, if you're listening to or watching this, don't get too excited by this lovely couch right here. I know it's tempting, but keep a hold of yourself. But let's talk about JD. And, we've been talking about him being weird, okay? Yes, there's all of that. But let's go a level deeper than that and talk about exactly how despicable and diabolical a lot of that weirdness actually is and what it really represents. Exactly what he would do if he were in a position of power. Obviously, being a senator is bad enough, but for him to be the vice president, for him to have Trump's ear, for him to be a heartbeat away from the presidency, for him to be, let's just be clear about this, what's going to happen if Donald Trump say Donald Trump gets elected and then Donald Trump goes to prison? What's going to happen then? Is it possible that JD Vance would then become the president? So when we're talking about JD Vance, we're talking about somebody who is going to be very, very close to the center of power. And what does that exactly mean? Given some of his extreme views. Okay, let's just start with one that I think people are already a little bit more familiar with, which is that he has been going on this rampage against childless people and then saying that people with children should have more voting rights than people without children, because somehow people without children don't have as much of a stake in America. That's his phrasing. Okay, let's just unpack what this really means here, especially in the context of the thing I'm going to say next in a bit. This would erode the whole principle of one person, one vote that was extremely hard fought and won over centuries of American history to get to a place where that was enshrined in the law. The notion that each person in this country that is a citizen has an equal right to vote and equal access to voting. That still isn't even true today. It's still an ideal that we have not yet reached. But the fact that we've even come anywhere close to it and the notion of one person, one vote is enshrined in a lot of our Supreme Court precedents. That only happened starting in the 1960s. Okay. It took that long for that to happen. It's also embedded in the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Okay. For JD Vance to start messing with that and saying that some people should get more voting rights than others. This is a debate that civilized democracies and republics stopped having a while ago, okay? The notion that you're going to give people more voting rights based on some characteristic that they have, that is exactly what characterized politics of, I'm not joking, the 1700s, the 1800s. You could vote if you had land. But that's the kind of dirty math that conservatives, anybody on the right wing of American politics, have been engaging in. And you can go back to the same thing with sort of more hardcore Tories in British politics, for example. This goes back centuries, okay? This is a battle that had to be fought and won. You had to get the Constitution amended to allow women to vote. JD Vance's political and economic sponsor, his sugar daddy, Peter Thiel, does not think that women should have the right to vote. He has said that openly. JD should be asked that question. Journalists should be asking him the question. Senator Vance, do you believe that women should have the right to vote? Corner him on that question. It should be asked of him, because it'll be interesting to see if he's going to part ways with his Svengali, Peter Thiel. Okay. And let's talk about this a little bit more. JD Vance does not only think that we should start messing with the formula of exactly who should get the right to vote and who not. And let's be clear, down that pathway is nothing but darkness, right? As soon as you start saying, oh, you're going to get your votes will count more if you have kids, where does that stop? It doesn't. Okay. As soon as you go breach that standard of equality, you can then go 8 million different directions with that, depending on exactly whose votes you want to restrict. Who do you want to disenfranchise? You start weighting who has more power to vote. right? This is that road, that dark, dark road. That is basically how the political right in advanced republics like the US, like France, like the UK, that is how they think they're going to cling to power, because they know that demographically they are slowly getting buried, that there's not really a way that they're going to be able to cling to power for that much longer. That's why they're getting so desperate and so extreme in doing so. But what they want to do more than anything else is just get this through our heads. Democrats have won the popular vote in 6 of the last 7 presidential elections. Let me say that again because we almost forget about it. But in 6 of the last 7 presidential elections, Democrats won the popular vote. 92, 96, 2000, 08, 12, 16, and 20, all of those times, okay? They know that they can't win if it's just a straight up vote. They've been benefiting greatly from the Electoral College, okay? That is now starting to fail them as something that's going to allow them to continue trying to compete for a majority, right? Where they might have not had enough votes, but the Electoral College gives them the win. Okay. Now, what they want to try to do, the next thing that they want to try to do as they get increasingly desperate is to say, wait. If you own land, if you own a gun, if you have kids, if you go to church, something else that helps them, then those people get more rights to vote, so that all of a sudden they can take their minority of the population and turn it into a majority. That's what they're trying to do. But that's dirty math. You can't do that. The whole notion is it's one person, one vote. And if you've got the majority, the Electoral College, we'll talk about that some other time. But if you've got a majority in enough states, then you win. That's how it works. That's a republic. That's a democracy. Republic democracy, we'll talk about that some other time too. That even if you want to say that's a republic, as people are fond of doing on the right, we're a republic, not a democracy. It's like, go ahead and make that. That's fine. But republics work this way too. If you don't believe me, go read a book. But that's how they work. If you start messing with exactly how much everybody's vote counts for, you're moving completely away from a republic and you're moving into something that's basically an aristocracy. And then you're just choosing who the aristocratic class is. And it might be people who wear red hats and go to Trump rallies. That's effectively what you're trying to do. You're saying that certain favored interests, certain favored people are going to get more votes. So let's just be clear. This sounds like a really nerdy tangent, and it probably is. But this is very, very, very dangerous turf that is now suddenly being brought up in mainstream American politics. We're getting ideas that are from the fringes of American political thought. Suddenly, somebody bearing those thoughts is right at knocking on the door of the very center of power. That is horrifying. But rather than be afraid of it, we just need to be brave enough to fight it. And I think that we will be, but I just want to make sure that we all know what we're up against. And it gets worse, okay? Because JD Vance has been also talking about things that are code, and not even particularly great code, for just a straight up desire to move from any kind of republic to a dictatorship. Okay. JD Vance has literally used the phrase late Republican. What does that mean? We know that people are often fond of talking about late capitalism, right? That we're in some late stages that will lead to either some sort of collapse or maybe an emergence of socialism. These ideas are popular on the left. Late republicanism is a far, far ultra right thought that we are in the last stages of the republic. Literally, that's what they mean. They don't mean like the late Republican Party and some new party is going to come up. Don't let them try to lie and wiggle away from this. They know exactly what they mean. Okay. JD Vance went to Yale Law. He knows what words mean. He knows exactly what he was saying when he said it. That when he said late Republican, it did not have a capital R. It had a little r. Okay. He is talking openly about moving to dictatorship. Right in that same quote, he then continued to go on to say that he believes that conservatives are going to have to get more comfortable with things they're currently not comfortable with. What the hell does that mean? We have more of a clue now with a clip that I saw for the first time this week. It'd probably been around before, but I think it's getting surfaced a bit more now, of Vance's sponsor, his sugar daddy, Peter Thiel, at a conference talking about what he refers to as the Overton window. Many of you are going to know what that means, but a lot of it is about what is that threshold for what is considered too extreme, and can you move that window outward? Again, they're talking in code, they're talking in sort of ultra right-wing nerd, but what they're doing here is they're talking about completely blowing out the entire notion of having a republic at all, right? Let's be really real what that means. It means that you've got people that would probably say, Congress, you can go home. Let's talk about what this means concretely. They would potentially just say, the president is going to issue all these executive orders and Congress doesn't matter. Or that they would actually call for Congress to be suspended for a time so that the president could assume emergency powers, something of that nature. We don't know exactly what the details would be, but this is the kind of end of Republican government and beginning of a presidential dictatorship that these people are talking about. Peter Thiel, in that same clip that I'm referencing, also talked about the exhaustion of liberalism and democracy. Again, he's speaking in kind of nerd code here, but Peter Thiel is unfortunately a very smart person, and he knows what these words mean. Liberalism in this context does not mean, oh, you're on the left. It basically means having a republic and a rule of law. That is what it means to political scientists, okay? He knows what that means. He was at some nerdy conference and he knew exactly what he was saying about liberalism and about democracy being exhausted. And then it gets worse with Thiel because, again, in that same clip, he draws parallels between 2020's America and 1920's Germany. Yes, you heard that correctly. This is not just me immediately jumping to the Nazi parallel. Thiel did this himself. So this notion that, and he's drawing these comparisons himself, saying that any kind of republic and a rule of law, separation of powers, checks and balances, that's all embedded in the word liberalism, okay? From a political science point of view, not from a watching cable news point of view, okay? It's not liberal like we think of it colloquially. It's liberalism from a political science point of view. If you're saying liberalism is exhausted, you're saying that it's another way of saying that republicanism, little r republicanism, is exhausted. If you're saying democracy is exhausted, we know what that means. If you're saying that then we are going to need to extend out the Overton window, that's just a different way of saying what JD Vance then said, clearly parroting what he'd heard Thiel say and making sure that he was carrying Thiel's words out into the public sphere. Okay. At the end of the day, Vance is really just a puppet, a slightly more charismatic puppet, a slightly less weird puppet for Peter Thiel. That's also true for Elon Musk. It's also true for Donald Trump. But what you have there is JD Vance then, when he's saying, oh, conservatives are going to have to do some things they're currently not comfortable with, that's just another way of saying we need to extend out what that Overton window looks like. And this is all just a very, very nerdy way of saying they don't believe that there should be a republic in America anymore. And a person holding this belief, who, by the way, does not appear to have held this belief 8 years ago, like JD Vance had very awful things to say about Donald Trump 8 years ago. JD Vance has now been filled up with these beliefs that come from Peter Thiel and other people close to him. He's now been filled up with these extreme beliefs, and now he is a missile heading directly for the center of power in this country. and would be the vice president to a 78-year-old man who is potentially about to go serve some prison sentences. So you tell me whether or not we should be worried about this. JD Vance is not just weird. He also happens to be quite possibly the most extreme candidate that's ever been on a national ticket since before the Civil War. I would say that only because you had candidates back then that actually wanted slavery. We haven't seen somebody like JD Vance since 1865 in terms of what he would mean to American liberty, to the American Republic. Donald Trump's been bad enough, but JD Vance carries that extremism to a whole nother level that we truly, truly have not seen. This is what we're up against. So don't let him put you to sleep with talk about how we're going to weight voting. Don't let him get away without having to answer questions about whether or not he would allow women to vote. Don't let him get away without explaining what he meant by late republicanism and by how conservatives are going to do some things that they may not be comfortable with yet, especially that late republicanism thing. Really pin him down on that one, oh journalists. Like, people need to be asking some really, really tough questions about JD Vance. And in the meantime, keep up the couch jokes because clearly they're resonating. And even if we can't necessarily get journalists to ask tough questions, we can deploy a lot of tough memes that get the basic point across. He is weird, he's an extremist, and he deserves to be nowhere near the White House as Veep or as anything else. He doesn't deserve to be in the Senate either. And I hope that having a brighter spotlight on him will cause the voters of Ohio to realize that they made a mistake and send him someplace else, maybe back to Peter Thiel's lair for some re-education and some different instructions, some different programming to send him back into the political arena, or maybe he'll just get shelved in favor of a different avatar. But we need to defeat this extremism. We need to realize what it is, defeat it head on, and keep fighting. We have to, because the entire system is at stake. That's all for today's show. As always, if you like what you're hearing, make sure to follow this podcast so it automatically downloads to your devices as soon as it comes out. Make sure to follow me on Twitter and subscribe to the Substack. Thanks, and we'll see you again next week.